I'm coming to you now with the ultimate conspiracy theory that's not really a theory. The truth of it is, I'm in Shanghai, China, which now has more power over the films that we see and get made than our own Hollywood does. The people can talk about Trump, and he does suck. I definitely wouldn't deny that. But the truth of the matter is that when Meryl Streep stands up there and gives an Oscar speech about Trump, or people will go on Twitter and attack him, and celebrities say Trump sucks, fuck him every single day, it makes no difference to their career, their livelihood. It might even help it. People think Meryl Streep may have even been nominated for an Oscar because of her Golden Globe speech about Trump this last year. China's a different matter. Increasingly, they have a lot of power over what we see in our movie theaters and even what gets made in the first place. A lot of Chinese funding is now coming to our American media. I'll give you an example. The movie Triple X, the new Vin Diesel Return of Xander Cage, going to be his comeback film, is actually really embarrassing when you watch the plot and you see that the people we thought were the bad guys, the Chinese hackers who were going to steal this thing that drops out of the sky or whatever, oh no, really, they're the good guys. And it's the CIA, in particular a woman played by Toni Collette, who looks a lot like Hillary Clinton, by the way. They styled her to look just so. And it's the military. And the climax of the movie is that all these Chinese hackers have to help Vin Diesel kill, maim, beat up, otherwise destroy different elite American military units that are really the real bad guys, and that's what you got to watch. Now, that was made with Chinese money by Chinese production companies, and that got a wide American theatrical release, and of course a release in China. So Chinese audiences and American audiences are watching the same message of really American government bad, Chinese rebels good. And you got to ask yourself, when was the last time you even saw a movie with a Chinese villain in it? No James Bond movies, no Jason Bourne movies. He fights the CIA. James Bond typically fights some European arms dealer or something like that. Or in the 80s, we fought the Russians, and before that it was the Nazis. And now that America's top regional rival really is China, it's pretty much nowhere in our movies. The last movie that even got made with a Chinese villain, the Red Dawn remake with Chris Hemsworth, they had to postpone the release by almost 2 years so they could go back and make the Chinese bad guys North Korean bad guys. And now you're not even going to see movies of North Korean bad guys, because when they interview assassinating Kim Jong-un, he didn't like it or whatever. They think a North Korean group with Chinese hacker assistants got into Sony and released all these private emails, and that put the kibosh on a Steve Carell movie that was going to be about North Korea. Increasingly, we're seeing a strong Chinese presence because Chinese money funds different Hollywood ventures, and we want those movies to play in China. And if you have a movie with a Chinese villain, it's not going to get approved by the state board. So you're not going to see that. And you're even going to see actors that China doesn't like Richard Gere apparently can't be cast in a big, large budgeted movie because Hollywood knows that it'll never play in Chinese theaters. So he can't play the Jedi in Star Wars or the old guy in the Transformers movie or whatever it is. And those are the biggest kind of paycheck roles. So by Marvel not casting him or whatever it is that he doesn't get these big parts, that's essentially delegating him to indie films that very few people see. You might ask yourself, have I even seen Richard Gere in a movie in the last 10 years? And it's because he said something bad about China in regards to Tibet and the Dalai Lama like 30 years ago. So that's how long their grudges are, that he can't even be cast in a Hollywood movie if it has any hope of playing in China. And it doesn't even have to be that movie. If Paramount puts him in a movie that's mid-budgeted and will never come to China anyway, they might, just as an act of retaliation, say, oh, well, that big, large-budget movie that Richard Gere's not even in, that won't play here either. The international box office now becoming such a big part of Hollywood revenue. Back in the old days, the silent movies, they said, oh, these movies can play anywhere in the world because you don't really need to speak English to understand the silent films. Well, that's why we're seeing these huge mega blockbuster movies, Pirates of the Caribbean, Transformers, The Mummy. All those movies flopped this year, but there's already talk of sequels for these movies just because of how well they did at the Chinese box office. So they're actively controlling what gets made in America, what gets distributed, and even what we see in theaters, because it's not just, the fact of the studios may not make it. It may not even get a theatrical release because AMC Theaters is now owned technically by a Chinese company. There's a Chinese billionaire who has very close ties to the state and the Communist Party that owns AMC Theaters. So are they going to put a movie out that is remotely critical of China? No. Are they going to distribute that? I mean, it could even be a documentary, something that doesn't even need to play over here, but that's not going to play on their screens. So you won't see a negative movie about China in theaters. It might not even get made because of the international box office. It definitely won't play here, so that's less money for Hollywood. And even against all odds, if something like The Interview does get made, the studio might be hacked and those emails might be distributed all over the place, which actively discourages more movies about that. And that's why you see movies like The Great Wall, where Matt Damon, all the European guys, they're evil and selfish, and he has to team up with the Chinese government to stop the monsters from taking over the world. A lot of these Hollywood movies are really embarrassing, carrying water for what is essentially a fascist regime. China is a fascist regime, and we're letting that dictate what Hollywood, supposedly the land of the rebels, the land of the iconoclasts, the fighters, the people who are going to stand up to bad guys, we're letting that determine what they make and what gets released. I think it's absolutely terrible that we're letting that happen, and they're much more afraid of that than they ever were Trump. Because literally, I'm going to say it in this video, fuck Trump, I don't like him, I can't stand him, I don't want to watch him on TV, but nobody's going to take this video down because of what I said about him. They just might because of something I say about China, a marketplace that even YouTube and Apple and Google and all the tech companies would definitely like to have a foothold in. So even they don't necessarily want to make something that would be overly critical of them, hoping that one day they'll get unbanned and their products will be allowed to be there.